Chapter 1. The Fortress on the Hill. High above the small town of Saydnaya, a large stone building stands. It looks like a castle from far away, strong and unshakable. This is Saydnaya Prison. People in the town see it every day, but they know very little about what happens inside. They only hear stories, whispers carried by the wind. The prison was built in the 1980s. It was meant to be a high-security facility, a place for Syria's most dangerous criminals. At first, it seemed ordinary, like any other prison. But over the years, Saydnaya became something more. It became a symbol of fear and power. From the outside, Saydnaya looks cold and quiet. Its tall walls seem to touch the sky. There are heavy gates made of iron, guarded by men with guns. No one goes in unless they have permission, and those who do rarely come out. In the town below, families live their lives in the shadow of the prison. Children play in the streets, but their laughter fades when they look up at the hill. That's where the prisoners are, they say in hushed voices. Parents tell them not to ask questions. It's better not to know, they say. But people do wonder. What happens behind those stone walls? Why do so many people fear this place? The answers lie in Saydnaya's history. When it was first built, Saydnaya was a modern prison for its time. It had cells, guards, and a strict system. It was designed to hold dangerous people, criminals who had broken the law. But as the years passed, the prison's purpose changed. It became a tool for the government, a place where enemies of the state were sent. These were not just criminals. They were people who spoke out, people who protested, people who disagreed. For these prisoners, Saydnaya was a nightmare. The walls were not just walls. They were barriers, cutting them off from the world. The cells were not just rooms. They were cages. And the guards were not just men doing their jobs. They were symbols of authority, of control, of power. Imagine being sent to Saydnaya. The gates close behind you with a loud clang. You are marched through the dark corridors. The walls feel like they are closing in. Each step echoes in the silence. You don't know where you are going or what will happen next. The prisoners live in fear. Every day feels the same. The cold stone floor under their feet, the dim light that barely reaches their cells, the sound of keys jingling as the guards pass by. Sometimes there is silence. Too much silence. Other times there are noises, footsteps, voices, the distant sound of a door slamming shut. And then there are the nights. Nights are the hardest. The air grows colder. The darkness feels heavier. Some prisoners try to sleep, but sleep does not come easily. Others stay awake, staring at the ceiling, lost in their thoughts. They think of their families, of the lives they left behind. They wonder if they will ever see the outside world again. But Saydnaya is not just about fear. It is also about power. For the Syrian government, the prison is more than a building. It is a tool. It sends a message. We are strong. We are in control. By locking people away, the government shows that it can silence anyone who challenges its authority. In the small town below, people understand this message. They see the prison every day. They know it is a warning. Don't speak out, it says. Don't ask questions. Don't stand against us. And so, many people stay silent. They live their lives carefully, avoiding anything that could bring trouble. But even in silence, fear spreads. Families worry about their loved ones. Neighbors whisper about who might be taken next. A knock at the door in the middle of the night can send shivers down their spines. Who will it be this time? They wonder. For the guards, saydnaya is their workplace, but it is not an ordinary job. They are part of the system that keeps the prison running. Some guards follow orders without question. Others struggle with what they see and do. I am just doing my duty, one might say. But is it that simple? Can a person just follow orders and forget about the human lives behind those doors? The prison itself seems alive. Its walls hold the weight of countless stories, stories of pain, of loss, of survival. Some prisoners find ways to cope. They make friends. They share memories of better times. They hold on to hope, even when hope feels impossible. A kind word, a shared piece of bread. Small acts of kindness become lifelines. But not everyone survives. The harsh conditions, the lack of food, the constant fear, it is too much for some. Their absence is felt deeply by those who remain. I will not forget you, a fellow prisoner might whisper. I will remember your name. Outside, the world begins to hear about saydnaya. Journalists, activists, and human rights organizations start asking questions. Survivors speak out, sharing their stories. Their voices are quiet at first, but they grow louder. They describe the cold cells, the harsh punishments, the feeling of being forgotten. Their words carry pain, but also truth. The world starts to listen. People demand answers. They want to know what is happening behind saydnaya's walls, but the government denies everything. These are lies, they say. Our prison is like any other. Still, the stories keep coming. Survivors describe the fear they felt every day, the uncertainty, the small moments of hope that kept them going. Their stories are heartbreaking, but they are also powerful. They remind us of the strength of the human spirit. Saydnaya prison stands tall on the hill, as it has for decades. Its walls remain unbroken. But the stories of those who lived there, those stories have escaped. They travel far and wide, reaching ears and hearts around the world. People begin to understand that saydnaya is not just a prison. It is a symbol of something much larger. For some, it is a symbol of fear. For others, it is a call to action, a reminder that justice and human rights must be protected, always. And so, the fortress on the hill remains, a place of stone and secrets, a place that holds lessons for all of us, lessons about power, about fear, and about the strength it takes to fight for freedom. Chapter 2. Inside the Walls. Saydnaya prison is more than just a building. It is a world of its own. A dark, hidden world. When the heavy gates close behind you, the outside world disappears. What lies ahead? Endless corridors, locked doors, cold, gray walls. The prison is like a maze, and once you're inside, it's almost impossible to find your way out. The guards lead new prisoners through the corridors. Their footsteps echo in the silence. The air feels heavy, and the smell of damp stone fills your nose. You feel small in this enormous place. The walls seem to stretch higher and higher. Every door you pass is locked. Behind each one, someone waits. Finally, you reach your cell. The door creaks as it opens. Inside, there is a small space with bare walls. A thin mattress lies on the floor. There is no window. The only light comes from a small bulb hanging from the ceiling. The door slams shut behind you. And you are alone. The first thing you notice is the cold. The stone floor is icy beneath your feet. No blankets, no warmth. The cold seeps into your bones, and you shiver even when you try to sleep. Some prisoners say it is the cold that breaks them. Others say it is the silence. The silence in Saydnaya is like nothing else. It is so deep, so heavy, that it feels like a weight pressing down on you. You can hear your own breathing, your own heartbeat. Sometimes, in the distance, you might hear a door slam or a guard's voice. But most of the time, there is nothing. Just silence. But the silence is not peaceful. It is filled with fear. What will happen next? Will the guards come? Will they call your name? No one knows when the guards will appear or why. They come without warning, unlocking doors and pulling prisoners out. Sometimes the prisoner returns. Sometimes they don't. Inside the cells, prisoners try to survive. Some are alone, locked away in isolation. They have no one to talk to, no one to share their pain. Others are kept in small groups. These prisoners form bonds, sharing stories, memories, and small moments of hope. A kind word, a shared piece of bread, these small acts of kindness help them hold on. But life inside Saydnaya is hard. The rules are strict. Prisoners are not allowed to speak loudly. They must move quickly when the guards command them. They must keep their eyes down, never looking directly at a guard. Breaking these rules brings harsh punishment. Food is scarce. A small piece of bread, a bowl of watery soup. That is all most prisoners receive each day. The hunger is constant. It gnaws at your stomach and weakens your body. Some prisoners trade food, offering their bread for a kind gesture in return. Others keep every crumb for themselves, afraid of losing their strength. The days blur together. There is no clock, no calendar, no way to mark the passage of time. Morning feels the same as night. Prisoners lose track of the days, the months, the years. Time becomes meaningless. At night, the darkness is complete. Without windows, the cells are pitch black. The silence feels even heavier. Some prisoners cry quietly, missing their families. Others lie awake, unable to sleep. Their minds race with questions. Why am I here? Will I ever be free? What is happening outside? For many, the hardest part is the waiting. Waiting for something to change. Waiting for news. Waiting for freedom. But nothing happens. Days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into months. And still, they wait. But even in such a dark place, there are moments of light. A prisoner might share a story of their family, bringing a smile to someone's face. Another might hum a quiet tune, reminding everyone of life beyond the walls. These small moments of connection give prisoners the strength to keep going. Some prisoners dream of escape. They imagine breaking through the walls or sneaking past the guards. But saydnaya is like a fortress. The walls are thick, the doors are locked, and the guards are always watching. Escape is impossible. Still, the dream of freedom keeps the prisoners alive. Others focus on survival. They learn to adapt, to keep their heads down, to follow the rules. They remind themselves to breathe, to stay strong, to take one day at a time. Survival is an act of courage. For the guards, life inside saydnaya is different. They hold the keys. They walk freely through the corridors. They are the ones in control. Some guards take their job seriously, following orders without question. Others seem to enjoy their power. They use it to intimidate and punish the prisoners. But not all guards are the same. Some feel guilty about what they see. They wonder if they are doing the right thing. One guard might slip a prisoner an extra piece of bread. Another might look the other way when a prisoner breaks a rule. These small acts of kindness are rare, but they matter. Every prisoner in saydnaya has a story. Some were arrested for protesting, others for speaking out against the government. Still, others say they were taken by mistake. They all have one thing in common. They are cut off from the outside world. Letters are forbidden. Visits are rare. Prisoners have no way of knowing if their families are safe. This uncertainty is its own kind of torture. The walls of saydnaya hold many secrets. Secrets of fear, pain, and survival. But they also hold stories of strength, stories of prisoners who refuse to give up, stories of those who kept hope alive, even in the darkest times. Outside the prison, the world is beginning to hear these stories. Survivors speak out, sharing what they endured. Their voices are quiet, but they are powerful. They remind us that life inside saydnaya is more than just survival. It is a testament to the human spirit. Saydnaya prison is a place of cold walls and locked doors, but it is also a place where the strength of the human heart shines through. Inside those walls, prisoners fight not just for freedom, but for dignity, for hope, for the chance to live another day. The maze of corridors and cells may trap the body, but not the soul. Even in the darkest corners of saydnaya, light can be found. A smile, a song, a memory. These are the things that keep prisoners going. These are the things that make survival possible. As we leave the cold, silent halls of saydnaya behind, we carry these stories with us. They remind us of the power of resilience, the importance of hope, and the strength it takes to endure. even inside the walls. Chapter 3. A Place of Power. Saydnaya prison is more than just walls and cells. It is a symbol, a tool, a message. The Syrian government uses it to show its strength, to remind people who holds the power. When you look up at saydnaya from the town below, it seems quiet, still, but its silence is loud. It speaks to everyone who sees it. Do not challenge us, it says. Do not question us. This is what makes saydnaya different. It is not just a place for prisoners. It is a place of control. In Syria, speaking out against the government is dangerous. Those who protest, write articles, or even share their opinions risk being arrested. Many of these people are taken to saydnaya. Why saydnaya? Because of what it represents. Fear, strength, control. The prison became infamous because of this. People whispered its name with fear. Families of the prisoners worried endlessly. Will my loved one come back? They asked. For many, the answer was no. Saydnaya became known as a place where voices were silenced, where questions were erased. But saydnaya's power isn't just about the prisoners. It affects everyone. Imagine you live in a town where this prison towers over you every day. You see it when you walk to the market. You hear stories about it from your neighbors. You wonder if someone you know will be taken there, or if one day it will be you. The prison is a reminder. It tells people to stay quiet, to obey, to not step out of line. This is how it works as a tool of power. People are too scared to resist, too scared to speak out. And so, the government stays in control. But power like this is dangerous. It is built on fear, not respect. It silences voices instead of listening to them. And when power is unchecked, it grows darker. Saydnaya is a clear example of this. Inside the prison, the government's power is absolute. The guards do not just follow rules, they enforce them without question. A prisoner might be punished for the smallest mistake, speaking too loudly, moving too slowly, looking at a guard the wrong way. These punishments remind the prisoners who is in charge. But the power goes beyond the guards. It is in the very design of the prison, the high walls, the locked doors, the isolation. These are not just physical barriers, they are psychological ones. They make the prisoners feel small, trapped, forgotten. Prisoners describe the feeling of being powerless. They took everything from us, one survivor said. Our freedom, our dignity, even our names. Many prisoners were called by numbers, not names. This stripped them of their identity. It made them feel like they were no longer people. But power like this does not stop at the prison walls. The government uses saydnaya to send a message to the world. We are strong, they say. We will not be challenged. This is why saydnaya became infamous. It is not just a place, it is a statement. When the Arab Spring began in 2011, people across Syria protested for freedom and justice. They wanted change. They wanted their voices to be heard. But the government responded with arrests. Protests were crushed. Voices were silenced. And saydnaya became even more full. For the prisoners, this was devastating. Many had risked everything to speak out. They believed in a better future. They believed in justice. And now they were locked away. Some were tortured. Others were left to suffer in silence. Their dreams of change seemed far away. But saydnaya's power was not only about fear. It was also about survival. The prisoners who endured this place showed incredible strength. Even in the face of absolute control, they found ways to resist. They shared their stories. They supported each other. They kept hope alive. The guards and the government tried to break them, but they couldn't take away their spirit. This is the other side of saydnaya's power. The power of the human heart. The power to endure, to resist, to survive. For the families of the prisoners, saydnaya's power was unbearable. They waited for news that often never came. They knocked on doors, asked questions, begged for answers, but the silence from the government was deafening. Many never found out what happened to their loved ones. The uncertainty was its own kind of torture. Outside Syria, the world began to hear about saydnaya. Survivors told their stories. Human rights groups published reports. They described the conditions inside the prison, the punishments, the fear. These stories shocked the world. People began to ask, how could this happen? Why wasn't anyone stopping it? Saydnaya became a symbol of the importance of human rights, a reminder that unchecked power can lead to terrible things. Around the world, people debated what to do. How could they help? How could they stop the suffering? These questions are not easy to answer, but they are important to ask. The Syrian government continued to deny everything. These are lies, they said. Our prison is fair. But the evidence was overwhelming. Photos, reports, survivor testimonies all told the same story. Saydnaya was not just a prison. It was a place of fear, a place of unchecked power. Even today, saydnaya remains a symbol. For some, it represents the government's strength. For others, it represents their oppression. But for the world, it is a reminder of what happens when power is not challenged, when voices are silenced, when justice is ignored. The prisoners of saydnaya teach us an important lesson. Even in the darkest places, people can find strength. Even when faced with absolute power, they can resist. Their stories inspire us to stand up for what is right, to speak out against injustice, to fight for freedom and dignity. As we leave this chapter, let us remember what saydnaya stands for. It is a place of power, but also a place of resilience. It shows us the danger of unchecked control, but it also shows us the strength of the human spirit. And that is a power no prison can take away. Chapter 4. Stories of the Past. Saydnaya prison has seen countless faces over the years. Each prisoner who walked through its gates carried a story. Some stories were about courage, others about fear. Together, they paint a picture of a place filled with pain and survival. Let us step into these stories and uncover the past. One of the first groups of prisoners to arrive at saydnaya were political activists. These were people who spoke out against the government. Some wrote articles, Others led protests. A few simply shared their thoughts with friends. But in Syria, even speaking out could be dangerous. Many were arrested for their words, not their actions. Take Khaled, for example. He was a teacher who believed in freedom of speech. He told his students, "You must think for yourselves. Ask questions." One day, his words reached the wrong ears. He was arrested and taken to Saydnaya. Khaled spent years in a small, dark cell. He missed his family, his students, his life. But he never stopped believing in the power of education. Then there were the journalists. These brave men and women wanted to tell the truth. They wanted the world to know what was happening in Syria. But the government did not want their stories to be told. Many journalists disappeared. Their families searched for them, only to learn they had been sent to Saydnaya. Lena was one such journalist. She reported on protests and interviewed families of the missing. "People need to know," she said. Her work was her passion, but it came at a cost. One night, the police came to her home. They took her away without explanation. Lena spent 3 years in Saydnaya. She lost her freedom, but not her voice. When she was released, she continued to write, even though it was dangerous. But not everyone in Saydnaya was a political prisoner. Some were ordinary people accused of crimes they said they didn't commit. Ahmed, a shopkeeper, was one of them. One day, a customer accused him of stealing. Ahmed denied it, but the police didn't believe him. He was taken to Saydnaya and locked away. "I am innocent," he told the guards, but no one listened. Ahmed's story is like many others. People caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Saydnaya also held soldiers who disobeyed orders. During the Arab Spring, some members of the military refused to fire on protesters. They were seen as traitors and sent to the prison. Their punishment was harsh. These soldiers believed they were doing the right thing, but they paid a heavy price. For every prisoner, the journey to Saydnaya was terrifying. They were blindfolded, handcuffed, and taken to the prison in silence. Some didn't even know where they were going. When they arrived, they were stripped of their belongings and their identity. They became numbers, not names. Inside the prison, life was hard. Food was scarce. Punishments were severe. But it was the isolation that hurt the most. Prisoners were cut off from their families. Letters were forbidden. Visits were rare. Many prisoners spent years not knowing if their loved ones were safe. This uncertainty was its own kind of torture. Each prisoner dealt with the pain in their own way. Some found strength in their memories. They thought of happier times. They imagined the faces of their children, their parents, their friends. Others turned to faith, praying for strength and guidance. And some shared their stories with fellow prisoners, creating bonds that helped them survive. Hassan was one of those storytellers. He was a poet before he was arrested. In the darkness of his cell, he recited poems from memory. His words brought hope to the other prisoners. "They cannot take our thoughts," he said. "They cannot take our dreams." But not all stories had happy endings. Many prisoners never left Saydnaya. Some died from illness, others from injuries. Their families never learned the truth about what happened to them. These unanswered questions haunted their loved ones. Saydnaya's history is not just about individuals. It is also about the larger picture. The prison became a place where the government could silence dissent, but it also became a place where resistance quietly grew. Prisoners who survived Saydnaya often carried its stories with them. They spoke out, sharing what they had seen and endured. Their voices became a powerful force for change. The world began to listen. Organizations like Amnesty International collected testimonies from survivors. These stories were painful to hear, but important to tell. They shone a light on what was happening behind Saydnaya's walls. One survivor, Samir, spoke about the day he was freed. He had spent 5 years in Saydnaya. When he stepped outside, he felt the sun on his face for the first time in years. "I thought I would never feel it again," he said. But freedom did not erase his memories. "I carry Saydnaya with me," he explained. "I carry the stories of those who are still there." Samir's words remind us why these stories matter. They are not just about the past. They are about the present, about the future. They teach us about the importance of justice, of human rights, of never staying silent in the face of oppression. As we reflect on Saydnaya's history, we see a pattern: fear, control, pain, but also courage, resilience, hope. The stories of its prisoners are not just stories of suffering, they are stories of survival. They remind us of the strength of the human spirit. Saydnaya's walls may be cold and unforgiving, but its history is alive. It is written in the voices of those who endured it, those who refused to be silenced, those who fought for freedom, even in the darkest of places. The past cannot be changed, but it can teach us, it can inspire us, and it can remind us that no matter how strong a prison may seem, the power of truth and hope is always stronger. Chapter 5. The Arab Spring. In 2011, a wave of change swept across the Arab world. It was called the Arab Spring. People in many countries began to protest. They wanted freedom. They wanted justice. They wanted their voices to be heard. In Syria, it started small. People marched in the streets, holding signs and chanting for change. They asked for basic rights: freedom of speech, fair treatment, and an end to corruption. Many were young and full of hope. They believed that change was possible. But the government saw these protests as a threat. They responded with force. Police used tear gas and water cannons. Protesters were beaten. Some were shot. But still, the people kept marching. Then came the arrests. The police began rounding up protesters. They took them from the streets, from their homes, even from schools and workplaces. Many were young men and women who had done nothing more than carry a sign or shout for justice. They were labeled as criminals, as enemies of the state. The arrested were sent to places like Saydnaya prison. The cells that were once half empty quickly filled. Day after day, more people arrived. The sound of heavy boots and jangling keys became constant in the prison corridors. For every new prisoner, there was fear. "Why am I here?" they asked. "What will happen to me?" Inside Saydnaya, the atmosphere grew even darker. The guards were overwhelmed by the number of prisoners. Food became even scarcer, the punishments more severe. Some prisoners whispered to each other, "This isn't just a prison anymore. It's a graveyard." Among the new prisoners were people like Fadi, a university student. He had joined a peaceful protest with his friends. They held signs saying, "We want freedom." But the police came quickly. Fadi was arrested and taken to Saydnaya. He had no idea where he was going or why. When he arrived, he was thrown into a crowded cell. There was no space to sit or lie down. The air smelled of sweat and fear. Fadi was not alone. Hannah, a schoolteacher, was also sent to Saydnaya. She had spoken out in her classroom, telling her students about their rights. Someone reported her to the authorities. One night, police came to her house and took her away. Hannah had never been in trouble before. Now she found herself locked in a cold, dark cell, surrounded by strangers. The prisoners from the Arab Spring shared one thing: hope. They believed in change. They believed that justice would come. But as the days turned into weeks, hope became harder to hold on to. The conditions in Saydnaya were brutal. The guards treated the prisoners as enemies. Many were beaten. Some were tortured. The goal was clear: to break their spirits. But even in such terrible conditions, the prisoners found ways to survive. They whispered stories to each other in the darkness. They shared scraps of food. They prayed together. These small acts of kindness kept their hope alive. Outside the prison, the protests in Syria grew. More people took to the streets, demanding change. The government's response became harsher. Soldiers were sent to stop the protests. Cities were bombed. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed. The violence shocked the world. Journalists tried to report on what was happening, but the government blocked access. Foreign reporters were not allowed into the country. Syrian journalists were arrested or silenced. The truth about the protests and the arrests became harder to find. People outside Syria began to wonder, what is really happening? Human rights organizations started asking questions. They received reports about Saydnaya. Survivors who managed to escape the country spoke about what they had experienced. They described the overcrowded cells, the torture, the fear. Their stories were heartbreaking. One survivor, Khalil, shared his story with a human rights group. He had been arrested during a protest and sent to Saydnaya. Khalil described how the guards beat him every day, how he was forced to stand for hours without rest, how he watched his fellow prisoners suffer. "We were treated like animals," he said. But Khalil survived, and he told his story to make sure the world knew the truth. These stories reached the international community. Governments, activists, and ordinary people began to speak out. They demanded answers from the Syrian government. They called for an end to the violence and the release of prisoners. But the Syrian government denied everything. "There is no torture," they said. "These are lies." Still, the stories kept coming. Survivors shared their pain. Families of missing prisoners begged for news. The truth about Saydnaya could no longer be hidden. It became a symbol of everything that was wrong in Syria. A place where voices were silenced and justice was ignored. For the prisoners still inside Saydnaya, hearing about the world's attention brought mixed emotions. Some felt hopeful. "Maybe they will save us," they whispered. Others felt angry. Why did it take so long for them to care? And many felt nothing at all. After months or years of suffering, hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. The Arab Spring changed Syria forever. What began as a call for freedom turned into a war. Cities were destroyed. Families were torn apart. Thousands were arrested. Thousands more fled the country, searching for safety. But Saydnaya remained. Its walls stood tall, holding the stories of those who had passed through its gates. Each cell held a piece of history, a piece of pain, and a piece of courage. The prisoners from the Arab Spring were not just victims. They were symbols of something greater. They represented the human desire for justice, for freedom, for dignity. Even in the darkest places, they found ways to resist, to survive, to hope. As we look back on the Arab Spring, we see a story of courage and struggle, of people who risked everything for a better future. Their fight for justice continues, and their stories remind us why freedom is worth fighting for. Before we begin Chapter 6, a quick note for our listeners. You're currently listening to this audiobook on WooEnglish. Remember, this content is specially made for WooEnglish listeners only. If you're hearing it on any other channel, it may be a violation of WooEnglish's rights. Please ensure you're tuned into the right source to fully enjoy and respect this audiobook journey. Now, let's continue the story. Chapter 6. Whispers of Torture. The stories began as whispers. Survivors of Saydnaya prison spoke quietly, their voices trembling. They described what they had seen, what they had endured. Each story was a window into the horrors behind those walls. Each word carried pain, fear, truth. The prisoners described the cells first. They were overcrowded. In some, there was barely enough room to stand. The air was heavy, filled with the smell of sweat and decay. People were crammed together, their bodies touching, unable to move freely. There was no privacy, no escape. Food was scarce. A small piece of bread, a bowl of watery soup. That was all the prisoners received each day. The hunger was constant. It gnawed at their stomachs, leaving them weak. Some prisoners shared their food, trying to help those who were too frail to eat. But others hoarded every crumb, desperate to survive. The punishments were the hardest to hear about. Survivors spoke of terrifying beatings. Guards used sticks, whips, and sometimes their bare hands. They hit prisoners until they screamed, until they couldn't stand, until they couldn't move. They didn't see us as people, one survivor said. We were nothing to them. Other punishments were even worse. Some prisoners were forced to stand for hours, days even, without rest. If they fell, they were beaten. Others were tied up in painful positions. They couldn't sleep, couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly. The pain was unbearable. There were stories of prisoners being dragged from their cells in the middle of the night. They were taken to small rooms, away from the others. The screams that followed haunted the prisoners who remained behind. You never knew if it would be your turn, a survivor explained. Every time you heard footsteps, your heart stopped. One man, Nabil, shared his story. He had been arrested for attending a protest. In Saydnaya, he was beaten every day. They wanted me to confess to things I didn't do, he said. They wanted me to admit I was a terrorist. Nabil refused. The beatings grew worse. His body was covered in bruises, his bones broken, but he held on. I told myself they could hurt my body, but they couldn't take my mind. For women, the experience was no less horrific. Amal, a school teacher, spoke of the fear she felt every moment. They used our fear against us, she said. They knew we were scared, and they made it worse. Amal was kept in isolation for weeks. She saw no one, heard nothing. The silence was its own kind of torture. Many survivors spoke about the psychological pain. The guards didn't just punish their bodies, they attacked their minds. They insulted the prisoners, called them animals, treated them like they were less than human. Some prisoners began to believe it. They lost their sense of self, their sense of worth. Sleep was rare in Saydnaya. The guards would bang on the doors, shout, or make loud noises in the middle of the night. Prisoners were constantly on edge. You couldn't rest, one survivor explained. Your body was tired, but your mind couldn't stop. You were always waiting for the next punishment. Some prisoners tried to resist. They shared whispered prayers or sang songs quietly in their cells. They held on to memories of their families, their children, their lives before the prison. These small acts of defiance gave them strength. But for others, the weight was too much. The hunger, the pain, the fear. Some prisoners lost hope. They stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped fighting to survive. The others tried to help, but there was only so much they could do. You couldn't save everyone, a survivor said. Sometimes you could barely save yourself. The world first heard about Saydnaya through these survivors. Their stories were painful to listen to, but they were important. They showed the world what was happening. They made people understand the cruelty behind the prison's walls. Human rights organizations began to investigate. They collected testimonies, recorded interviews, and published reports. They described the overcrowded cells, the lack of food, the harsh punishments. They detailed the ways the government used fear to control the prisoners, to break them. The reports shocked everyone who read them. People couldn't believe such things were possible. Could human beings really treat others this way? Could such cruelty go unnoticed for so long? But the survivors insisted their stories were true. "We lived it," they said. "This is our reality." The Syrian government denied everything. They called the stories lies, the reports fake. "There is no torture in our prisons," they said. But the evidence was clear. Photos, testimonies, and even satellite images supported the survivors' claims. The truth was undeniable. These stories did more than reveal the truth about Saydnaya. They also raised bigger questions. How could this happen? Why didn't anyone stop it? What does it say about the world when such cruelty goes unpunished? For the survivors, telling their stories was not easy. They had to relive their pain, their fear, their suffering. But they told them anyway. They wanted the world to know, to understand, to remember. "We cannot let this happen again," one survivor said. "We cannot forget." Today, the whispers of torture at Saydnaya have become a cry for justice. Survivors, families of the missing, and human rights activists continue to speak out. They demand accountability. They demand answers. They demand that the world listen. Saydnaya's story is not just about the past. It is about the present and the future. It reminds us of the importance of standing up for human rights, of holding those in power accountable, of protecting the dignity and freedom of every human being. The stories of Saydnaya are hard to hear, but they are important to know, because only by facing the truth can we hope to create a better world, a world where no one has to endure such cruelty again. Chapter 7. Voices from the Shadows. For many years, Saydnaya was a place of silence. Its walls held secrets. The prisoners inside couldn't speak. The families outside didn't know the truth. The government denied everything. But silence doesn't last forever. Slowly, voices began to rise. It started with a few survivors. These were people who had endured Saydnaya and managed to leave. Their bodies were scarred. Their hearts were heavy. But they carried something important, the truth. They began to tell their stories, even though it was painful, even though it was dangerous. One survivor, Miriam, spoke about her time in the prison. She described the cold, dark cell where she spent months alone. She spoke of the hunger, the punishments, and the fear. "I thought I would never leave," she said. "But I survived. And now, I must tell the world." Another survivor, Yusuf, shared his memories of the overcrowded cells. He remembered how people fought to stay alive, how some never made it. "We were treated like we didn't matter," he said. "But we do matter. Every one of us." These stories reached human rights organizations. Groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch listened carefully. They knew how important these voices were. They began collecting testimonies, documenting the horrors of Saydnaya. Each story was a piece of a larger puzzle. Together, they painted a picture of a place filled with suffering. The organizations published reports. They shared what they had learned with the world. The reports were shocking. They spoke of torture, hunger, and death. They described the government's use of fear to control its people. The reports gave the world a glimpse into Saydnaya, a glimpse that was hard to forget. One report included satellite images of the prison. These images showed how the building had changed over time. More space had been added. This wasn't to make the prison better. It was to hold more people. The images proved that Saydnaya wasn't just a prison. It was a tool for silencing voices. Survivors' stories were shared at events, in newspapers, and online. The world began to listen. People asked, how could this happen? Governments and activists demanded answers. What was once a hidden secret became a global concern. For the Syrian government, this attention was unwanted. They denied the reports. These are lies, they said. Our prisons are fair. But the evidence was clear. Too many voices were telling the same story. Too many survivors had lived the same nightmare. The voices from the shadows didn't stop. Families of the missing began to speak out. These were mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters who hadn't seen their loved ones in years. They knocked on doors, wrote letters, and begged for answers. "Where is my son?" one mother asked. "He was taken, and I don't know if he's alive." Their pain was heartbreaking. They held photos of their loved ones, hoping someone could tell them the truth. Some had hope, others had none, but they all had questions. And they demanded answers. International courts and legal organizations joined the fight. They called for justice. They wanted those responsible for the suffering to be held accountable. "This cannot go unpunished," one lawyer said. "The world must act." The stories from Saydnaya also sparked larger conversations. They made people think about human rights, about the importance of freedom, about the dangers of unchecked power. Saydnaya became a symbol, not just of suffering, but of the fight for justice. Around the world, protests were held. People carried signs that read, "Justice for Saydnaya's prisoners and end the silence." Activists worked tirelessly to raise awareness. They held events, organized campaigns, and demanded action from their governments. But change was slow. The Syrian government continued to deny everything. Survivors were threatened. Some were forced to flee their country to stay safe. The fight for justice was difficult, but it didn't stop. One of the most powerful tools in this fight was storytelling. Survivors like Miriam and Yusuf didn't just share their pain. They shared their strength. They talked about the friendships they made in the prison, about the moments of hope that kept them alive. These stories inspired others. They showed that even in the darkest places, the human spirit can shine. For many people, these stories were a wake-up call. They realized how important it is to stand up for human rights, to speak out against injustice, to listen to the voices of those who have been silenced. Saydnaya's secrets are no longer hidden. The voices from the shadows have been heard. The survivors, the families, the activists, they are all part of a larger fight. A fight for truth, for justice, for a better future. As we listen to these voices, we must remember what they teach us. They remind us of the power of resilience, of the importance of speaking out, of the need to protect the rights and dignity of every human being. Saydnaya's story is not just about the past, it is about today and tomorrow. It is a reminder that silence can be broken, that shadows can be illuminated, and that justice is always worth fighting for. Chapter 8. A Call for Justice. The survivors of Saydnaya had endured unimaginable pain. They carried scars on their bodies and wounds in their hearts. But they also carried something powerful, the truth. They knew what had happened inside the prison, and they were determined to tell the world. Survivors began speaking out at events, in interviews, and on social media. They described the overcrowded cells, the hunger, the torture. Their stories were raw, filled with emotion. The world needs to know, they said. This cannot be forgotten. But justice isn't simple. It requires proof, witnesses, and accountability. In Saydnaya's case, much of the truth was hidden. The Syrian government denied everything. They called the survivors liars. They claimed the reports were fake. How do you fight for justice when those responsible refuse to admit their crimes? Survivors faced another challenge: fear. Many had escaped Syria to stay safe. Even in other countries, they worried about being watched or followed. Some received threats. Be silent, or you will regret it, the messages warned. But most survivors refused to stay quiet. If we don't speak, no one will, they said. Families of the missing joined the call for justice. These families didn't know if their loved ones were alive or dead. They held up photos asking, "Where is my son? Where is my daughter?" Their voices were filled with pain. "We need answers," they demanded. "We deserve the truth." Human rights organizations worked alongside the survivors and families. They collected testimonies, documented evidence, and published reports. They brought survivors together to share their stories at international meetings. The goal was clear: to hold those responsible accountable. One of the first steps toward justice was gathering evidence. This included satellite images of Saydnaya, showing changes to the prison over time. It included reports from doctors who examined survivors. And it included the stories of the survivors themselves. These stories were powerful, but they were also heartbreaking. Some survivors could barely speak as they described what had happened to them. Legal experts began building cases. They wanted to take those responsible to court. But there were challenges. Many of the key figures were still in power in Syria. They were protected by the government. Bringing them to trial seemed almost impossible. International courts became involved. They called for investigations. They promised to hold hearings. But the process was slow. Survivors grew frustrated. "We need justice now," they said. "Why is it taking so long?" For many, the fight for justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about acknowledgement. Survivors wanted the world to recognize their pain. They wanted the government to admit what had happened. "They cannot erase our stories," one survivor said. "We will not let them." Activists played a crucial role in keeping the fight alive. They organized protests, created campaigns, and shared survivor stories online. They used hashtags like Justice for Saydnaya to raise awareness. They reminded people that the fight wasn't over, that justice was still possible. One of the most emotional moments came when survivors and families gathered for a vigil. They lit candles for those who were still missing. They held hands and shared stories. Some cried. Others stood silently, their faces filled with determination. "This is not just about us," one mother said. "It's about every person who has suffered." The global community began to respond. Some governments imposed sanctions on Syrian officials. Others offered support to survivors and families. Human rights organizations received funding to continue their work. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Justice also took other forms. Survivors wrote books and made documentaries about their experiences. They spoke at schools and universities, educating the next generation. They wanted to ensure that Saydnaya's story would never be forgotten. But the road to justice remained difficult. Some survivors felt hopeless. They wondered if the fight was worth it. "Will we ever see justice?" they asked. Others encouraged them to keep going. "We owe it to those who didn't survive," they said. "We owe it to ourselves." One day, a small victory came. A court in another country convicted a former Saydnaya guard. He had fled Syria and was living abroad. Survivors testified against him, sharing what he had done. The court found him guilty. It was a moment of hope. A reminder that justice, though slow, was possible. This victory inspired others. Survivors began searching for more people who had worked at Saydnaya and fled Syria. They wanted to bring them to court. They wanted to show the world that accountability was possible, even if it took time. Justice for Saydnaya isn't just about the past. It's about the future. It's about creating a world where such cruelty cannot happen again. Survivors and activists hope their fight will inspire others to stand up against injustice, no matter where it occurs. As we reflect on Saydnaya, we must remember the courage of those who spoke out. They risked everything to tell the truth. They demanded answers when no one else would. They turned their pain into action. The fight for justice continues. It is a long and difficult road. But with every voice that speaks, every story that is shared, and every step that is taken, the world moves closer to the truth. Closer to accountability. Closer to justice. Chapter 9. The Global Conversation. The stories of Saydnaya echoed far beyond Syria's borders. Survivors shared their pain with the world. Human rights groups published reports. Activists demanded justice. And slowly, Saydnaya became more than just a prison. It became a symbol of fear, a symbol of courage, and most importantly, a symbol of the fight for human rights. People around the world began to talk about saydnaya. They asked hard questions. How could such things happen? Why did no one stop it? Could it happen in other countries too? These questions were uncomfortable, but they were necessary. Saydnaya forced people to confront the harsh reality. Justice and freedom are not guaranteed. In classrooms, teachers introduced saydnaya as part of history lessons. Students listened to the stories of survivors. They learned about the importance of standing up for what is right. In universities, professors debated the role of governments and the dangers of unchecked power. Could saydnaya have been prevented? What does it teach us about our own societies? For activists, saydnaya became a rallying cry. They held protests outside government buildings. They carried signs that read, "Never again," and "Justice for all." In speeches and rallies, they spoke about the need to protect human rights everywhere. If we ignore saydnaya, one activist said, we allow it to happen again, anywhere. The global conversation was not just about saydnaya. It was about what saydnaya represented. It was a reminder that no country is immune to injustice, that power, if unchecked, can turn cruel, that silence in the face of oppression allows suffering to grow. In some countries, saydnaya sparked important changes. Governments introduced new laws to protect prisoners. Police and military forces were given human rights training. International organizations increased their efforts to monitor prisons around the world. These actions were small but meaningful steps toward preventing another saydnaya. But the conversation wasn't always easy. In many places, people denied the reality of saydnaya. They said the stories were exaggerated, that the survivors were lying, that it couldn't happen in their country. These denials were frustrating for survivors and activists. "We lived it," one survivor said. "How can they deny what we went through?" Still, the stories of saydnaya continued to spread. Documentaries showed the faces of survivors and the families of the missing. Photos of the prison's walls became symbols of injustice. Social media allowed people to share their thoughts, their anger, their hope. Hashtags like saydnaya truth and human rights now trended across the globe. For some, saydnaya was a wake-up call. They realized how fragile freedom could be, how quickly power could become dangerous, and how easily people could be silenced. Saydnaya reminded the world of the importance of speaking out, of protecting those who cannot protect themselves, of never taking justice for granted. Governments, too, were forced to confront their own systems. Could this happen here? Some leaders asked. Are our prisons fair? Are our laws just? In some cases, these questions led to reforms. In others, they were ignored. But saydnaya made it impossible not to ask them. The global conversation also brought new challenges. Survivors of other prisons began sharing their stories. They talked about abuse, torture, and injustice in their own countries. Their voices joined the chorus, creating a larger movement for change. Saydnaya had opened a door, and through that door, many voices began to speak. The fight for human rights is never simple. It is filled with resistance, denial, and doubt. But it is also filled with hope, with courage, with the belief that a better world is possible. Saydnaya became a symbol of that fight, a reminder that the struggle for justice is worth it. One of the most powerful moments in this global conversation came during an international human rights conference. Survivors from different countries stood on stage together. Each shared their story of survival. Their words were heavy with pain, but also with strength. The audience listened in silence, moved by their courage. At the end of the conference, a young woman stood up. She was a law student, inspired by what she had heard. "How can we help?" she asked. The survivors smiled. One replied, "By remembering, by sharing our stories, by fighting for justice wherever you are." This is the legacy of Saydnaya. It is not just a story of pain. It is a story of resilience, of people who refuse to be silenced, of a world that, despite its flaws, is capable of change. For the survivors, the global conversation is both a blessing and a burden. They are grateful that their voices are being heard, that people are learning from their experiences, but they also carry the weight of their memories. Every interview, every speech, every report forces them to relive their trauma. Yet, they continue to speak. They know how important their stories are. They know that their voices can inspire action, can change minds, can prevent another Saydnaya. The conversations sparked by Saydnaya are far from over. In fact, they are just beginning. As more people learn about the prison and its survivors, the fight for justice grows stronger. The world is watching, listening, asking questions. And this is how change begins. Saydnaya's story is a warning, a reminder, a call to action. It tells us that freedom must be protected, that justice must be demanded, that silence is never the answer. Around the world, people are hearing that call, and they are responding. As we continue to discuss Saydnaya, we must remember its lessons. We must remember the courage of its survivors, the pain of its families, the strength of those who fight for justice every day. And we must ask ourselves, what can we do to make the world better? To ensure that Saydnaya never happens again? The conversation is not over. It never will be. Because justice and freedom are not destinations. They are journeys. Journeys that require constant effort, vigilance, and courage. Saydnaya is part of that journey, a reminder of where we have been, and a guide for where we must go. Chapter 9. The Global Conversation. Saydnaya prison was no longer just a place in Syria. It had become a symbol of cruelty, of suffering, but also of courage. Around the world, people began talking about Saydnaya. They asked questions. They debated. What did it mean for humanity? What lessons could be learned? Survivors had shared their stories. Their words were painful but powerful. They described the hunger, the beatings, and the fear they endured. They spoke about the courage it took to survive. Their stories made people listen. And once the world heard about Saydnaya, it couldn't look away. Human rights organizations called saydnaya a wake-up call. If such horrors could happen in one country, they asked, could it happen elsewhere? The answer was unsettling. Yes, it could. And that realization frightened many people. Governments, activists, and ordinary citizens joined the conversation. They talked about justice, about freedom, about what it means to be human. In newspapers, online forums, and at international meetings, saydnaya became a topic of debate. It forced people to confront uncomfortable truths. For some, saydnaya was a reminder of their own country's struggles. They thought about the prisoners in their own jails, about those who had disappeared without a trace, about the abuse of power. Could this happen here? They asked. And often, the answer was closer than they wanted to admit. In classrooms, teachers told their students about saydnaya. They explained why human rights matter, why freedom is precious. Students listened closely, some with tears in their eyes. They imagined what it must feel like to be locked away, forgotten, and treated like less than human. How can this happen? They asked. The answer was not simple. Activists used saydnaya's story to push for change. They organized protests and held up signs that read, "Never again" and "Justice for all." They wanted the world to learn from saydnaya, to act before it was too late. We must protect human rights everywhere, one activist said. Not just in Syria, everywhere. The stories of saydnaya's survivors reached every corner of the globe. In Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas, people heard about the prison. Some were shocked, others were inspired, many felt angry. How could the world let this happen? They wondered. But the more they learned, the more they realized that silence had allowed it, that ignorance had played a role. This global conversation wasn't just about saydnaya. It was about power, about what happens when power is unchecked, when governments can act without fear of consequences, when people are too scared to speak out. Saydnaya showed the world what happens when justice is ignored. In some countries, the story of saydnaya inspired change. Leaders promised to improve conditions in their own prisons. Laws were passed to protect the rights of prisoners. Training programs taught police and guards about the importance of human rights. These changes were small steps, but they mattered. They were signs of hope. But not everyone wanted to listen. Some people denied the survivors' stories. They called them lies. This is just propaganda, they said. It's not real. These denials hurt the survivors deeply. They had risked everything to tell the truth, only to be doubted. But they kept speaking. They refused to be silenced. The conversation also brought new voices to the table. Survivors of other prisons began to share their experiences. They spoke about torture and abuse in their own countries. Their voices joined the growing call for change. saydnaya had opened a door, and now more stories were coming to light. One of the most powerful moments in this global conversation came during a human rights conference. Survivors from different countries stood on stage together. They shared their stories of survival. They spoke of their pain, but also of their hope. The audience listened in silence, moved by their courage. At the end of the event, a young woman in the audience stood up. She was studying law and had been inspired by what she heard. "What can we do?" she asked. "How can we help?" A survivor replied, "You can remember. You can share our stories. You can fight for justice wherever you are." Social media played a big role in spreading Saydnaya's story. People used hashtags like Saydnaya Truth and Justice for All to share articles, videos, and survivor interviews. Millions of people saw these posts. Many were moved to take action. They signed petitions, donated to human rights groups, and joined protests. Saydnaya became a rallying cry for those who believed in justice. For some, the story of Saydnaya was deeply personal. They saw it as a reflection of their own struggles, a reminder of their own country's past or present. "We know this pain," one protester said at a rally. "We have lived it too." But the global conversation wasn't just about pain. It was also about hope. Survivors showed the world that even in the darkest places, people can find strength. That courage can survive, even in the face of unimaginable suffering. These stories inspired people to keep fighting, to believe that change is possible. Governments, too, were forced to respond. Some denied the reports, calling them lies, but others acknowledged the truth and promised to take action. Sanctions were imposed on Syrian officials. International courts launched investigations. Progress was slow, but it was a start. For the survivors, this global attention was bittersweet. They were glad the world was listening, glad that people cared. But they also knew that justice would not come easily, that the fight was far from over. "We've opened the door," one survivor said. "Now we must keep pushing." Saydnaya's story is not just about the past, it's about the present and the future. It reminds us that human rights are fragile, that freedom must be protected, that silence is never the answer. Around the world, people are hearing that message, and they are responding. As the global conversation continues, we must remember Saydnaya's lessons. We must remember the courage of its survivors, the pain of its families, the strength of those who refuse to be silent. And we must ask ourselves, how can we make the world better? How can we ensure that Saydnaya never happens again? The story of Saydnaya is not over. The fight for justice continues, and the world is watching, listening, and learning. Chapter 10. Resilience and Hope. The prisoners of Saydnaya endured unimaginable suffering. They faced hunger, pain, and fear every day. Yet, some of them survived. Their stories are not just about pain, they are about resilience. They show us that even in the darkest places, hope can survive. Survivors talk about how they found strength in the smallest things: a whispered word from a fellow prisoner, a shared piece of bread, a memory of home. These moments, though tiny, kept them going. "They tried to break us," one survivor said. but they couldn't take away our hope. Inside the prison, the days were long. Time seemed to stop. There were no clocks, no sunlight, no way to tell morning from night. For many prisoners, the only way to survive was to hold on to their minds. They thought of their families. They imagined their freedom. They dreamed of better days. Amir, a teacher, was one of these survivors. Every night, he would close his eyes and picture his children. He imagined their laughter, their smiles. "That's what kept me alive," he said, "the hope of seeing them again." Even when his body was weak, Amir's love for his family gave him strength. In some cells, prisoners found ways to communicate. They tapped messages on the walls. They whispered stories to each other in the dark. These connections gave them a sense of humanity. We reminded each other that we were still alive, one survivor explained. That we were still people. For many, faith was a source of strength. Amal, a schoolteacher, spent hours praying in her cell. She prayed for her safety, for her family, for the other prisoners. "It gave me peace," she said. "It reminded me that I was not alone." Others found strength in memories. They thought about the simple joys of life, walking in the park, eating with friends, watching the sunset. These memories became treasures. They reminded the prisoners that there was still beauty in the world, that life outside the walls was worth fighting for. But survival wasn't just about holding on to hope. It was also about finding small ways to resist. Some prisoners refused to let the guards break their spirits. They stood tall, even when they were beaten. They held on to their dignity, even when everything else was taken away. Hassan, a poet, was one of these prisoners. In the darkness of his cell, he recited poems from memory. His words brought comfort to the others. "They can lock us up," he said, "but they can't lock up our thoughts." For Hassan, poetry was a form of freedom, a way to escape the walls, if only for a moment. The prisoners also found hope in each other. They shared their food, their stories, their strength. They supported one another in moments of despair. "We were like a family," one survivor said. "We took care of each other." Not everyone made it out of saydnaya. Many prisoners lost their lives to hunger, illness, or torture. Their absence was deeply felt by those who survived. "We carry their memories," a survivor said. "We live for them too." When the survivors were finally released, the world outside felt strange. The air smelled different. The sun seemed brighter. Some had been in saydnaya for years. They had missed weddings, births, and funerals. They had lost time that they could never get back. But they also found joy in the simplest things, walking freely, hugging their loved ones, hearing the laughter of children. These moments reminded them that life, even after so much pain, could still be beautiful. Rebuilding their lives was not easy. Many survivors struggled with nightmares and memories of the prison. Some found it hard to trust people again. Others felt disconnected from the world. I survived Saydnaya, one man said, but it will always be with me. Despite these challenges, many survivors found ways to heal. They talked about their experiences. They shared their stories with the world. They used their pain to inspire change. For them, survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about making a difference. Amal became a teacher again. She told her students about Saydnaya, about what she had endured. I want them to know the value of freedom, she said, to understand that it is something we must protect. Hassan, the poet, published a book of poems inspired by his time in the prison. His words touched readers around the world. They reminded people of the resilience of the human spirit, of the power of hope. Survivors like Amir and Amal teach us an important lesson. They show us that even in the darkest moments, there is light. Even in the face of unimaginable suffering, there is strength. Their stories remind us that resilience is not just about surviving. It's about finding a way to live, to hope, to dream again. The resilience of Saydnaya's survivors is a testament to the power of the human spirit. It is a reminder that even in the worst circumstances, people can endure. They can fight. They can hope. As we listen to their stories, we are inspired. Inspired to stand up for justice, to protect the rights of others, to remember that hope is never truly lost. The survivors of Saydnaya show us that, no matter how dark the night, the dawn will come. Chapter 11. Lessons from Saydnaya. Saydnaya prison is not just a place. It is a story of pain, survival, and courage. Its dark history has shocked the world, but it has also taught us important lessons we cannot ignore. One of the most important lessons from Saydnaya is about human rights. The stories of its survivors remind us how easily rights can be taken away. In Saydnaya, people were stripped of their freedom. They were treated as less than human. This is why human rights matter. They protect dignity. They protect life. They remind us that everyone deserves respect. The world learned that justice cannot be taken for granted. In Saydnaya, justice did not exist. People were punished without fair trials. Some were arrested for peaceful protests, others for expressing their opinions. These were not crimes. They were acts of courage, yet they were met with cruelty. The survivors of Saydnaya teach us that justice must be defended, everywhere, for everyone. Justice is not just about laws, it is about fairness, about treating people with respect even when they disagree with us. Without justice, power becomes dangerous. Another lesson from Saydnaya is about the power of silence. For many years, the world did not know what was happening inside the prison. The government denied the truth. People were too scared to speak. And so, the suffering continued. This silence allowed the cruelty to grow. It allowed injustice to spread. We must remember that silence can be deadly. When we see something wrong, we must speak out. When people are suffering, we must listen. Silence helps the oppressor, not the oppressed. Speaking up can be hard. It can be risky. But it is the first step toward change. Saydnaya also teaches us about resilience. The prisoners faced unimaginable pain, yet they survived. They found strength in hope, in faith, and in each other. They refused to let the prison break their spirit. Their resilience reminds us of the power of the human heart, that even in the darkest places, people can endure. They can fight. They can dream. Their stories are not just about surviving, they are about teaching. The survivors want the world to learn from their pain. They want to make sure saydnaya never happens again. They remind us that history is not just about the past. It is about the future. About what we can do to make the world better. Another important lesson is about compassion. The prisoners who survived saydnaya showed kindness to one another, even when they had very little to give. They shared their food. They whispered words of comfort. They supported each other when things seemed impossible. This compassion helped them survive. It reminds us how important it is to care for others. Even in small ways, kindness can make a difference. Saydnaya's story also raises a bigger question. How do we prevent such places from existing? The answer is not simple, but it starts with awareness. We must educate people about the importance of human rights. We must hold governments accountable for their actions, and we must stand together against injustice. The global reaction to saydnaya shows us the power of unity. When survivors shared their stories, the world listened. People from different countries, cultures, and backgrounds came together to demand justice. This unity is powerful. It reminds us that change is possible when we work together. But saydnaya's story is also a warning. It shows us how quickly things can go wrong, how power can be abused, how people can be silenced. It is a reminder that freedom is fragile, that justice must be protected, always. The lessons from saydnaya are not just for governments or leaders. They are for all of us. They remind us to be brave, to stand up for what is right, to speak out when we see injustice. These lessons are simple but powerful, and they are needed now more than ever. For students, saydnaya is a reminder to learn from history, to ask questions, to think critically. It shows them why their voices matter, why they must never take their freedom for granted. Teachers around the world use saydnaya's story to teach about justice and humanity, to inspire young minds to make a difference. For activists, saydnaya is a call to action. It reminds them why their work is so important, why they must keep fighting for those who cannot fight for themselves. Saydnaya gives them strength. It fuels their passion for justice. For survivors, saydnaya is a source of pain, but also of purpose. They use their stories to create change, to inspire others, to make sure their suffering was not in vain. They are living proof that resilience and hope can triumph over cruelty. The lessons from saydnaya go beyond Syria. They are lessons for the entire world. They remind us that human rights are universal, that justice is not just for some, it is for all. They challenge us to think about our own societies. Are we treating people fairly? Are we protecting the vulnerable? Are we speaking out when it matters? These questions are not easy, but they are necessary. Saydnaya shows us what happens when we ignore them. It shows us the cost of silence, the cost of injustice, and it challenges us to do better. As we reflect on saydnaya, we must carry its lessons with us. We must remember the courage of its survivors, the pain of its prisoners, the strength of those who fought for justice. And we must ask ourselves, what can we do? How can we make a difference? The answers are not simple, but they start with small actions. Speaking up, showing kindness, learning about human rights, supporting those who fight for justice. These actions may seem small, but they can create big changes. Saydnaya's story is not just about the past. It is about the future. It is about building a world where such places no longer exist, where justice and compassion guide our actions, where every person's rights are respected. Let us learn from saydnaya. Let us honor its survivors by fighting for a better world. Let us remember that justice is not a gift. It is something we must work for. Together, always. Chapter 12. A Future of Change? Saydnaya Prison still stands. Its high walls cast a shadow over the town below. For many, it remains a symbol of fear and suffering. But as we end this story, we must look forward. Can saydnaya change? Can the world ensure such places never exist again? The future of saydnaya is uncertain. For now, it remains under government control. Its walls are silent, but its reputation speaks loudly. Survivors call it a graveyard for justice. Activists call it a crime scene. And the world wonders, what will happen next? Some hope for change. They dream of a future where saydnaya is no longer a prison, but a memorial. A place to honor those who suffered. A place to remember the past so it is never repeated. We must not forget, one survivor said. Forgetting would betray those who didn't survive. Others are less hopeful. They fear that saydnaya will continue as it is, a place of secrets and fear. They worry that the world's attention will fade, that justice will be delayed or denied. The fight isn't over, an activist said. We must keep pushing for change. One way to ensure a better future is through accountability. Survivors, activists, and human rights groups are working tirelessly to hold those responsible accountable. Trials are being held. Evidence is being collected. The goal is clear: justice for saydnaya's victims. But justice is not just about punishment. It is also about acknowledgement, about admitting the truth. Many survivors say this is the most important step. We want the world to know what happened, one man said. We want the truth to be recognized. Education is another key to change. Schools around the world are using saydnaya's story to teach about human rights. Students learn about the dangers of unchecked power, about the importance of speaking out against injustice. The next generation must know, a teacher explained. They are the ones who will build the future. For survivors, the future is both a challenge and an opportunity. Many carry the scars of their past, both physical and emotional. Rebuilding their lives is not easy, but they are determined to move forward, to use their experiences to create change. Amal, a former prisoner, now works as a human rights advocate. She speaks at conferences and schools, sharing her story. "I want people to learn from my pain," she said. "I want to make sure no one else has to suffer like I did." Hassan, the poet, writes about hope and resilience. His words inspire others to keep fighting for justice. "We can't change the past," he said, "but we can shape the future." The global community also has a role to play. Governments, organizations, and individuals must continue to push for justice, to support survivors, to speak out against places like Saydnaya. This is not just Syria's fight. It is the world's fight. Saydnaya teaches us a powerful lesson. Freedom is fragile. Justice is not guaranteed. These values must be protected every day, by everyone. The moment we stop caring is the moment we allow injustice to grow. As we look to the future, we must ask ourselves, what kind of world do we want? A world where places like Saydnaya are forgotten? Or a world where they are remembered and never repeated? One vision for Saydnaya's future is transformation. Some suggest turning the prison into a museum, a place where people can learn about its history, where survivors' stories can be shared, where the world can reflect on the importance of justice and human rights. Others propose rebuilding it entirely, turning the land into a park or a community center, a space for healing and hope. "We need to replace fear with hope," one activist said, "to turn a place of suffering into a place of renewal." But change takes time. It takes effort, and it takes commitment. The road ahead will not be easy, but Saydnaya's survivors remind us that resilience is possible, that hope can survive even in the darkest places. As we end this story, let us carry Saydnaya's lessons with us. Let us remember the courage of its survivors, the pain of its prisoners, the strength of those who fight for justice every day. The future of Saydnaya is not just about the building itself. It is about what it represents. It is about ensuring that no one anywhere suffers as its prisoners did, that no voice is silenced, that no human is treated as less than human. The world has the power to change, to create a future where justice and compassion guide our actions, where human rights are respected, where places like Saydnaya are no longer possible. But this future depends on all of us, on our willingness to remember, to learn, to act, to stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult. Together, we can build a world where justice is not just a dream, but a reality. As we reflect on Saydnaya, let us turn its pain into purpose. Let us honor its survivors by fighting for a better tomorrow. Let us remember that change is possible if we are brave enough to make it happen. Saydnaya's story is not over. The fight for justice continues, and the future is ours to shape.